We begin the day with power, money, and Europe's poorest country. In Albania, thousands of protesters have demonstrated in the capital, Tirana, over a planned development linked to Jared Kushner, the son-in-law of U.S. President Donald Trump and the husband of Ivanka Trump. Now, the project involves Sazan Island and the Vjosar Nata Delta coastal area, one of Albania's most sensitive environmental zones. It's home to flamingos, seals, and sea turtle nesting sites. Now, Albanian Prime Minister Edi Rama says this is a transformational investment promising jobs, and he has made it clear he won't do anything to stop it. Ivanka Trump was recently asked about the project that she and her husband are fronting. Here is how she described it.
I'm working on an incredible project with my husband in the Mediterranean. It's massive in scale. An unbelievable, beautiful 1,400-hectare private island in the middle of the Mediterranean. We were on a friend's boat, and we stopped for a swim. Effectively, that's how we found it.
Well, protesters in Albania's capital, Tirana, they see something very different here. They see protected land being open to private wealth. They see a lack of transparency. And they see a country trying to join the European Union while apparently bending its own environmental protections for a politically connected foreign investor. Here's what some people in Albania are saying.
These demonstrations began for me as a personal act to protect my own belongings. But today they go beyond my own interests. It is about protecting Albania for our children.
Of course, it's very important to have investments in the country. It's very important for the economy, but you have to choose very wisely where to build it. There's a reason why this area is called the protected area.
We are not against development in Albania. We are in favor of it, but with transparency.
Well, joining me now is Michel. He leads the Combating Kleptocracy program at the Human Rights Foundation. He has written extensively on illicit finance, foreign influence, and the way politically connected money moves through democracies. Casey, it's good to have you with us. You're the right man to talk to this evening. Thousands are protesting in Tirana over a luxury resort linked to Jared Kushner. When you look at this story, is it a local environmental issue, or is there something bigger here?
Brent, this story is multiple things. It is both an environmental protest, it's a protest against corruption in Albania, and it's a protest against corruption as it operates in the 21st century, which crosses borders and crosses hemispheres, and in this case, by all appearances, directly links Washington and Tirana. I should say I'm not necessarily surprised that this is something that sparked this amount of protest domestically in Albania. Of course, there have been concerns about domestic corruption in Albania for years and years, but everything we know about this deal, the destruction of this pristine, protected natural reserve, the lack of any kind of transparency, and of course, who's benefiting from this in terms of Jared Kushner, Ivanka Trump, and many others in their orbit, I'm not necessarily surprised that this seems to be the light that lit the tinder that has led to all of the protests we are now seeing erupt around the country.
I want to talk about Jared Kushner, that connection, in just a moment. But let me ask you about what we're hearing from the government in Albania. The government says that this is an investment. It's going to bring jobs, more tourism. So what should our viewers, what should they be looking for when development, in quotation marks, when it becomes the language used to hide political access?
Well, of course, there are ways to develop a tourism industry. There are plenty of countries and regions around the world that have thrived on that kind of industry and has brought much needed wealth and jobs to certain parts of the world. But what we are seeing right now, in this case in Albania, is a completely opaque series of decisions out of both Jared Kushner's camp, but also the government in Albania. There was no public procurement process. There was no transparency. We still don't have really any idea about where all that money is actually going to. And of course, there was no say whatsoever from local populations that have stewarded these regions and these protected areas for years and for generations. Again, there's a way you can go about developing a tourism industry. This is certainly not the way to do it.
And does that have a lot to do with the name Jared Kushner? I mean, how does he change this story?
That absolutely does. If this was some other developer from some other country or some other company, it's possible that we wouldn't have seen nearly the amount of this protest. Maybe there would have been some pushback. But Jared Kushner, of course, has become an absolute lightning rod, both in the United States and, of course, elsewhere, for his connections to his father-in-law, President Donald Trump, and all the ways that Jared Kushner has been profiting from his access to the presidency. Of course, most spectacularly, the billions of dollars he and his firm have taken in from governments in places like Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and elsewhere. But there are also these deals going on the ground. We saw just last year a deal actually fall through in Serbia for similar reasons. On the ground pushback and protest that ended up gutting a Jared Kushner property. It certainly seems to be that this may be what's happening in Albania as well. He has absolutely been a target because, again, of his own decisions, his own lack of transparency, and, of course, his connections to his father-in-law, Donald Trump.
Well, if you do have a politically connected foreign investor coming in who can move this quickly near protected land, I mean, what does that tell us then about the strength of Albania's institutions?
Well, it tells us that Albania's institution and supposed democratic trajectory may be a little bit more hollow than we think. But I should say at the same time, it also tells us that the Albanian population, those that are actively protesting this and, of course, supporting the protests wherever they are those who want to see a brighter, cleaner, more democratic and more transparent Albanian future, and potentially Albania as a member of the European Union itself. This is nothing but a moment for the government in Albania to be made to be looking like they don't know what they're doing, like they are in this only for their own financial incentives. And of course, those voters in Albania and those protesters are seeing this for exactly what it is and are now raising their voices for a more democratic future in Albania.
What would you say that this project is doing to the possibility of Albania, making its EU hopes become a reality?
Brent, it's a fantastic question. Certainly those in Brussels who are watching this, I assume, are scratching their heads at why the government of Edi Rama and his supporters in Tirana fast-tracked this, did so without any kind of public input, did so without any kind of transparency. I have to imagine this is raising all kinds of concerns in Brussels about Albania's future membership in the European Union. At the same token, of course, this is generating significant domestic pressure for more pro-EU and pro-transparency mechanisms and policies moving forward. So it's certainly possible in the long run this will end up accelerating Albania's movement toward the European Union. And I suppose in a certain way we have Jared Kushner to thank for that, although I'm sure he never planned that at the outset of this.
Do you think this kind of project, would it have a realistic chance of moving this way if we were talking about a project inside the EU on EU territory?
Absolutely not. The beauty of the European Union is the weight of the regulatory apparatus that comes with each and every project, most especially as it pertains to transparency. Transparency for financing and, of course, transparency for who benefits. The ability for the Albanian government to fast-track this project for the American president's son-in-law is simply revealing that there are more mechanisms in more corrupt governments, more kleptocratic regimes that can open the doors to perhaps similar kleptocratic or oligarchic networks elsewhere. There's a reason we're seeing this in Albania and not in France, not in Germany, not in Italy, not in Poland. There's a reason it is in those non-EU countries that we're seeing this flourish most especially.
I mean, despite what we are seeing on social media, we have to make clear there is no solid reporting showing an Israel-Palestinian connection to this Albania deal. But Jared Kushner's Middle East role, a Gulf-backed investment firm, and his past Gaza waterfront comments, they are why people are asking questions. How should journalists address that without spreading speculation?
Well, look, it's no secret at this point that Jared Kushner brings more conflicts of interest than we have ever seen in American diplomatic history, whether it's in Iran, Israel, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and elsewhere. My impression is this Albanian project isn't necessarily related to a broader, let's call it pro-Israel policy, but it is certainly something that's within the ballpark of these kinds of deals that, by all appearances, seem to be leaning toward corrupt or at least anti-transparent mechanisms that are benefiting only a small number of individuals. The broader issue with a figure like Jared Kushner is because of all of this baggage, because of everything we know, and of course, because of everything he has done to put that front and center, you have to ask questions if this does fit into a broader geopolitical playbook, both for him and, of course, for his father-in-law. I certainly don't have an answer to that right now, but you have to be asking those questions about projects like this in Albania and elsewhere.
I understand there is a special prosecutor who looks at just cases of corruption in Albania who is now investigating this. What should they be looking at here? The money, the land title, the legal changes, the environmental process, or the political relationships?
Well, look, if you can do any and all of it, absolutely fantastic, because, of course, it touches on every single one of those. But at the end of the day, as it comes down to whether it's figures like Kushner, his father-in-law, or let's call them some politicians in Albania who may be benefiting, much of this comes down to the money. It's about following the money, tracking the finances, who is benefiting, and of course, what is that money doing? What doors is it opening? What pristine, natural, protected areas is it destroying? Is it bulldozing? What is that money doing, and who is it benefiting? That's where you have to start, and everything can flow from there.
Let me just ask you, before we let you go, Casey, the protesters say that Albania is not for sale. Is it being sold out to the highest bidder, in your opinion?
At a certain point, when Albania is part of the European Union, I have no doubt that it will not be for sale. But at this moment, right now, under the current government of Prime Minister Rama in Tirana, it is absolutely for sale to the highest bidder. And all too often, as we have seen under the current administration in Washington, those bidders are those closest connected to the sitting American president, Donald Trump, his family, including his son-in-law, Jared Kushner. It's no surprise that it's Kushner who is there, and it's no surprise that this is happening right now in a government like Albania.
Michel, Casey, good to have you on the program. Good to get your insights into this story that I think is going to have some long legs on it. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Brent.
And Michel is the author of the upcoming book, United States of Oligarchy. The book examines how people with extreme levels of wealth have tried to amass increasing power in the U.S.